Welcome to the Legal Insights with Mixon, Carroll, and Frazier.
Welcome to Legal Insights with Mixon, Carroll, and Frazier with Attorney James Carroll of Mixon, Carroll, and Frazier in Columbia, Louisiana. James handles labor and employment matters and represents clients in state and federal civil litigation. For decades, he's worked on disputes that range from workplace conflicts to serious civil cases, giving him a clear view of how these cases actually unfold in Louisiana courts. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about personal injury cases in rural Louisiana and what actually impacts case outcomes. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Evan. Nice to be here.
Pleasure. So, James, when a serious injury case is filed in rural Louisiana parish, how does that environment shape the case from the beginning?
Well, that's a good question. Rural Louisiana is a farming community. It's mostly non-industrial, agricultural. Everybody knows everybody. We all go to church together. We have our social activities are with the same people day in and day out. So when someone's hurt here, then of course your scope of who you're going to be presenting the case to generally tends to be your neighbors, people you grew up with, people that you are maybe even related to. So it does have a unique impact on how you approach the case. So when I handle a case in an area that is more populous, nobody may know anyone. And so credibility and your past relationships are incredibly important in litigation in rural Louisiana.
How do jury pools in smaller communities, like you mentioned, differ from those in larger cities across Louisiana?
Well, along that very same lines, you bring in a jury of 75 to 100 people to pick an actual jury of, let's say, 6 to 12, depending on the statute. And in state court, generally, it's a 12-person jury. You grew up with these people. I grew up with them. I know them on the jury pool, or I've represented them over the last 30 years. They've been in my office, or I've been against them. I may have represented their spouse in a divorce. So these relationships are very important. They weigh heavily in whether or not you're going to try to keep that person on the jury or remove them from the jury, depending on your past relationship. But that's only half the picture. The other half of the picture is the actual plaintiff. Does that plaintiff know the people on the jury, or are they related to the people on the jury? Remember, let's say, for example, Caldwell Parish. Now, remember, I say parish. If you're not from Louisiana, that's the same thing as a county. We have parishes, not counties. But, my client may be, related to somebody on that jury. That relationship is going to carry heavily. What's the credibility of that client? What's the credibility of my law firm? What's the credibility of the witnesses that are going to come give testimony for or against my client? Those are all things that we as attorneys are looking at to determine what individuals from the pool we're going to try to keep on the jury. And of course, the other side's looking for those same issues to determine who to get off of the jury.
What role does local reputation, of the parties, for the lawyers, even the businesses involved, play in these cases?
I think it's critical, probably more so in a rural setting than in a metropolitan area. I mean, the only way that you may know anything about the attorney in a metropolitan area are the billboards.
Yeah.
And those can leave positive impressions or they can leave negative impressions, but that's it. Or billboards or TV commercials, etc. But in rural Louisiana or rural any state, that attorney has a personal relationship with the people that are on the jury pool, or ultimately, if selected on the jury themselves, they have personal interaction with them. Is that an attorney seen as as someone that's easy to talk to, or are they aloof? Are they hard to? Are they considered to be aggressive or easy to talk to? Those kinds of reputations in the area that I live in are very important. Do you see them on a regular basis at the restaurants? Do you see them at church? Do you see them at the Lions Club? What do they do as far as the community is concerned? All of those things, I think, weigh much more heavily in that relationship than, say, in a large community where you may never meet that person. But that's simply not true where I live.
How does the availability or lack thereof, of medical specialists and expert witnesses affect how these cases are presented, James?
That really has become a problem. I'm very fortunate. My father, grandfather were all physicians, surgeons, doctors. My extended family are also doctors.
Wow.
So I've had a lot of unusual ability to get medical opinions than say other attorneys in the area, because doctors are hard to come by, particularly if you need a specialist. If there's a unique injury, then they're hard. There's no one local. But that actually lends itself to sympathy with the jury, because, wow, you've got this particularly unique issue and you can't get local service. You've got to go all the way to Shreveport or Dallas or New Orleans, or maybe even further to a specialist in Boston to get the unique kind of medical attention that this injury requires. And because of that, it creates an unusual difficulty for the client. And that's a sympathy factor that the local people can understand, because what would they do if they were in that situation and couldn't get the kind of medical care that's needed? So it is a positive thing in that context, but it's negative in the sense that my client actually has to go to those distant locations to get those services. So it plays both ways.
Mm. So in these rural cases, how do insurance companies tend to evaluate, exposure differently than they might in more urban venues?
I think it plays to the plaintiff's advantage at times, because they don't have that connection. They don't have that understanding. They see it as, and not always, but I think generically they see it as, well, it's the same in Caldwell Parish as it is anywhere else, when it's really not. And so when you're trying to find or you're trying to educate rather the insurance company as to the lack of medical care or the lack of expertise in this area, they miss that point. And so you've got to be very careful and spend some time and energy on that to make sure that the insurance company does understand that and calculate that into the damages as they're making their proposals or responding to your proposal. That education is up to the attorney. And if the attorney fails to do that, then it's going to negatively impact on their client. So that's definitely a role that your attorney needs to take on.
Can you share an example of a rural or personal injury cases or case where the, setting itself meaningfully, influenced how the case unfolded?
Well, that's difficult. The the best way I can explain it is doctors in rural parishes are very concerned about their patients. They are more patient oriented, I believe, than they are result oriented. And what I mean by that is there's not a lot of patients to run through the mill. And so when their day goes by, they spend time talking to their patients. It's not based on quantity and trying to move a large number through for economic reasons. Because of that, there's this very close relationship that develops between the patient and the doctor. And when the insurance company comes into the picture, they seem to miss that calculation. And I think that, at least in my experience, when the insurance company is looking at a generic, I don't know, head injury or neck injury or back injury, the doctors in larger municipalities don't have that close relationship with the patient. They haven't seen that patient from birth to death, if that makes sense. And so when I put the doctor from the local community onto the stand, that doctor has an emotional connection to that patient that exceeds what I have found in metropolitan areas, and they make a much better connection with the jury describing that client's medical issues. It's more emotional. It's more connected. I've actually found uh, healthcare professionals get emotional talking about the pain and suffering that patient's been through. Whereas when I'm in a larger community like New Orleans, or even when I practiced in New York, the physicians had almost no emotional connection to my client, and it was very clinical. But in Columbia, when Dr. Mark, for example, the local physician, is talking about the damage that my client suffered, He understands because he spent time with that guy. I may be going beyond what you're asking, but I find that personal connection between doctor and my client much more emotional and compelling than I do in the larger communities.
Mm. So how do economic, realities in smaller communities factor into damage calculations and jury perception?
Yeah, that's tough. When you're trying to describe to a jury of farmers and blue collar workers and people who literally can to can't during their day, not 9 to 5, but can to can't. You get up in the morning and you work until you can't go any further.
Right.
They tend to be, the heart and soul, the salt of the earth kind of people. And you start talking about, well, gee, my hand got crushed in the door and I can't do this anymore. They sort of look at you like, yeah, that sounds like something I experience every single day. Why do you think you're entitled to all this money? That becomes very difficult. The jury awards in rural USA are much more difficult to get a larger verdict than it is in the municipalities. Uh, but to counter that, I found that if you take pain and suffering and break it down on a day-to-day basis and start with a really small number that they can relate to, that's something that they understand, and you take that number and you multiply it by every day of the week, and then every week of the month, and then every month of the year, and then every year that your doctor says, oh, well, gee, because of this injury, this person can no longer go hunting. This person can no longer do their basic job, and it hurts to this level. And you take that small amount of money on a day-to-day basis and extend it over the life of what the doctor says this person's going to be suffering. It's amazing how big that number gets, and the jury can understand it, and they can put it into terms that they can relate in their lives, and suddenly the jury is giving you a very large award that they otherwise wouldn't have done.
Hmm. So, what strategic adjustments do you make in trial preparation when you know the case will be heard in that rural courthouse?
I guess the biggest adjustment is trying to explain it in a way that that jury pool, that panel of 12, can most likely understand. So if I've got a panel of people that are on that jury that are more doctors, lawyers, engineers, executives, I'm going to explain it one way. But if I've got a larger percentage of lower income individuals, then I'm going to have to explain it in a way that they would understand. And as is the case in most rural communities, um, you might be able to get away with not really focusing on damages and focusing on just emotional impacts if this jury knows your client. And typically in a small community, that's exactly what you're dealing with, are people who know each other. And it's more of an emotional issue than it is an economic calculus, if that makes sense.
It does. So, when you evaluate a new personal injury case in rural Louisiana, what factors tell you early on whether it's likely to resolve through negotiation or maybe even head towards trial?
Depends on the size. If you've got really solid medical evidence. In other words, there is a broken bone. There is absolutely quantifiable damages that nobody argues with. That's an easy case. If you've got an insurance company on the other side that has the ability to pay, and you've got the medical damages that are very clear, and there's no question, a crushed skull, a broken body, those kinds of things, that's a lot easier to move towards resolution because the jury is going to award a big damage. They're going to award it over a long period of time. And the insurance company knows that. You're dealing with a local person who has a local relationship with the jury. And they see this guy or this woman in the community in a wheelchair or whatever. And so they'll see that. And the insurance company's not going to expose themselves to that. But on the other hand, if it's a fender bender with a neck injury that's not, it's a muscle issue, it's, a chiropractor, those kinds of things where it's not necessarily open and obvious, then, the insurance company is going to push back. And that's going to result in a very long and extended argument. And it's going to be a lot of back and forth. And those cases are the ones that, tend to be our bread and butter as far as the law firm is concerned. But we really try to avoid those if at all possible.
Ooh, good stuff. James, thank you for your time.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. That's it for today's episode of Legal Insights with Mixon, Carroll, and Frazier. If you'd like to learn more about James Carroll and the team at Mixon, Carroll, and Frazier, visit mixoncarroll.com to learn more about their civil litigation and personal injury work across Louisiana. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and share this episode with someone who might need it as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.